that's a very good idea so that we can hear him perfectly and not hear any background noise.
Sherry, I'll go ahead and mute everyone. And then when anyone wants to speak, I cannot unmute you. You'll have to go ahead and unmute yourself. And as soon as I mute all, Kwami will need to unmute himself.
Wonderful. Mary, you're very powerful. Thank you, Mary. That is excellent. Okay. I want to welcome you all here tonight. My name is Dr. Sherry Simon. I'm president of Pax Christi Little Rock. And I want to welcome you to our 41st Pax Christi speaker series. So I started counting it up and I was so excited to see that number. So this is our 41st speaker series. And before I introduce our honorable guest tonight, though, I would like to start tonight with a prayer, okay? So let's start in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Good and gracious God, who loves and delights in all people, we stand in awe before you, knowing that the spark of life within each person on earth is the spark of your divine life. Differences among cultures and races are multicolored manifestations of your light. May our hearts and minds be open to celebrate similarities and differences among our sisters and brothers. We place our hopes for racial harmony in our committed action and in your presence in our neighbor. And dear Lord, help us devote our whole life and thought and energy to the task of making peace, praying always for the inspiration and the power to fulfill the destiny for which we and all people were created. We pray all of this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
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 Hi. All right, welcome. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Mr. Kwami Abdul-Bey to speak to us on one of the most pressing issues of our time, racism and white privilege. Kwami is a member of the Arkansas Coalition for Peace and Justice. He's also a co-founder of the Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement. APJMM is a statewide collaborative effort to acknowledge and learn from our shared documented history of hundreds of incidents
Sherry, stop.
Sure.
Unmute.
Can you, okay, good.
I am so sorry.
That's okay, that's okay, that's good. I don't know how much of that you got, so I'll just start over about Kwami. Did you just mute me, Mary, or?
It was a few sentences ago.
Okay, okay. So I'm going to tell you about yes, I'm going to go ahead and tell you about the Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement.
Thank you.
It's a statewide collaborative effort to acknowledge and learn from our shared documented history of hundreds of incidents of extra-legal racial, political, and religious violence and injustice, with the goal of creating meaningful avenues for transformative peace and restorative justice through truth-seeking and reconciliation. And I have to tell you, I'm a friend with Kwami on Facebook, and he is absolutely dedicated to what he does with that. He puts out research article after research article on the things that have gone on in the world that I'm sure he will bring to light this evening and share with us to prove that our whole society is beset with systemic racism. So Kwami is also author of the book, The Tables Have Turned, A Street Guide to Guerrilla Lawfare. So the goal tonight for everyone is to listen and learn about the experiences of people of color in this state and in this country, and how racism is in the very heart of our system, and it's created such a disparity for people of color in our society. So without further ado, he needs no further introduction. Let me introduce Kwami Abdul-Bey.
Please unmute. Thank you.
I am going to try to share my screen if I can figure out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide just a little bit of a presentation to let you guys know. I did have an original presentation of Fire and Brimstone that I brought, but then I read the bishop's July 2nd statement on Black Lives Matter, and that made me feel a lot better about what I'm doing, because I'm like, okay, they get it, they just need a little bit more help. So all right, so let me try to share my screen here. All right, here we go. All right, as Sherry said, I am Kwami Abdul-Bey. I am born and reared in Little Rock, Arkansas, where I am the grandchild of A.B. Moorhead and Johnny Elizabeth Dixon Moorhead. My grandfather was the first Native American postmaster here in the state of Arkansas, and he was also a veteran of both the First World War and the Second World War. And my grandmother, she's originally from Mississippi, but she relocated here to Little Rock when she was just a child with her two siblings and her parents. And her oldest brother was, in 1927, he was accused of murdering a white girl and leaving her body in the bell tower of the Presbyterian Church in downtown Little Rock. His name is Lonnie Dixon, and he was 17 years old when he was accused. And I think he was originally arrested in late March, I believe, of 1927. And he was arrested along with my great-grandfather, Frank Dixon, and his two cousins. And he actually, like I said, late March was the arrest, and he ended up being executed by late May of 1927. Historians today have done the research, and they've come to the conclusion that he was not the one who actually was the murderer. But at that time, there was a lot of racial tension, and there was a lot of historical injustices going on that we know as racial terror lynchings. So there in 1927, in May of that year, there was a gentleman who was in the part on the outskirts of what was then Little Rock, and he was in what we now know the intersection of Canis and John Barrow, in that area. And his name was John Carter. And at the time, he was walking down the street. I don't know if we call it a street then, maybe a road. But he was walking down the street, and he witnessed a woman and her daughter in a situation where their horse was getting a little bit out of hand. So he immediately went over to assist the woman and control the horse. Well, in him doing that, he was actually accused of violating the white woman and her white daughter. And he ended up having to run for his life. And he ended up running, and he was caught by a lynch mob at the intersection of what we now know as 12th Street and 12th, Canis, and Rodney Parham all converged. And there he was lynched. And after he was lynched, and in the lynch mob were Little Rock police officers. There are pictures showing them as participants of the lynch mob. But after he was lynched and dead, they took his body down, and the same rope they used to tie him to the telephone pole, they tied it to the back of a car, and they drove the car up to Markham, dragging his body, and then they turned right and drove the car all the way down Markham to City Hall, dragging his body the entire way. And they stopped in City Hall just to let the mayor know, let the mayor and the police chief know, hey, this is what we're doing. You guys, if you want to come join us, come join us. But we're going to do this. We don't really care what you think. So they ended up making another right turn at that corner on Broadway, and they drove to 9th and Broadway. The significance of the intersection of 9th and Broadway is at the time, 9th Street was known as Black Wall Street here in Little Rock. It was the epicenter of a lot of Black economic and social progressiveness. And it was the hub of the Black community here in Little Rock, Arkansas. And when they got to the intersection of 9th and Broadway, there was a church at 9th and Broadway across the street from what is now the Wendy's. Right now it's an automotive repair shop, but that used to be Bethel AME Church. And they broke into Bethel AME Church, and they took all of the pews out of the church and stacked them in the intersection of 9th and Broadway, threw his body on top of that and lit it on fire and had a party. And that party was attended by, like I said, officers of the Little Rock Police Department and members of the city board. And the sheriff attempted to stop what was going on, but he was very outnumbered, the Pulaski County Sheriff. So since he was very outnumbered, all he could do is just stand back. And they ended up having a party the rest of the night as that bonfire in the middle of 9th and Broadway burned itself out. And at one point, as the historical record tells us, at one point someone broke off one of the arms on the charred body and used that arm to direct traffic. So that's the foundation of what we're dealing with today. That happened in 1927, not even 100 years ago. And the mentality, the hatred that caused that to happen, because they killed John Carter because they could not get to my uncle, my grandmother's little brother, because they threatened to lynch him, and the Pulaski County Sheriff whisked him out of the city and took him to Texarkana for his safety. So since he was taken to Texarkana for his safety, then John Carter ended up being lynched because they were not able to get to my great uncle, Lonnie Dixon. And also my great grandfather, Frank Dixon, was also whisked away to Texarkana. When my great grandfather was released, he was never seen again. No one in my family knows whatever happened to him. but we do know that Lonnie Dixon was executed on, I think it was a couple of months after his 17th birthday. He was executed for a murder that he did not commit. One of the things that my wife, Clarice, and I do and have been doing since we've been married is we've been working with young people here in Central Arkansas to teach them how to not only to think for themselves, but to, after they begin to think for themselves and start asking probing questions and investigating things, and not letting social media or the Channel 4, Channel 7, Channel 11 news guide their thinking. We created an organization called Ouachita Foothills Youth Media Arts and Literacy Collective. And the goal of that organization is to teach young people in Central Arkansas how to create their own media, and create their own media with the idea of putting out their own thoughts, putting out their own expressions of what they believe truth really is. And we did that. One of the first and most important projects that we did when we got started about 5 years ago is we created KWCP 98.9 low power FM radio station. It's a radio station that was geared towards, it was student-oriented radio station geared towards young people, that was headquartered in West Central Community Center, which is over on John Barrow and at the intersection of John Barrow and Colonel Glenn. And in that radio station, we had about 80 young people from junior high school age to students at UALR who were participating in creating their own radio shows. The radio station ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we had these young people running their own radio station. The radio station is no longer in existence as we knew it because the couple of members of the city council tried to control what the young people were saying and doing. And I stepped in and said they will do what they want and they will say what they want as long as it's within our moral code. And as a result, one of the city directors, Doris Wright, actually disbanded the radio station. So what we're dealing with here is those are just some examples of what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm not going to talk a lot. I just want to give you guys a little bit of information so that we can have a discussion amongst ourselves. The Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement is actually a project of Ouachita Foothills. And this organization came about after my wife and I, we took our oldest daughter, Dreama, who we homeschool our children. And she was graduating from high school about 3 years ago. And she was required to basically write a thesis. And she wanted to go to the grand opening of the National Lynching Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. At the time, I was not pretty much interested in that. I'm like, a lynching museum? Really? I don't want to do that. And so for about 3 or 4 weeks, she and my wife, Clarice, begged and pleaded to go. And I ended up saying, okay, well, we will go, but I'm not going to like it. And so we went to the museum, and we weren't able to go to the grand opening because of my own reservations, but we went the week after. And I'm actually glad that we didn't go to the grand opening because I heard that it was very, very, very well attended. And so when we went the next weekend, there was nobody there. So we were able to take in everything. But at that lynching museum, that's where we learned a fact that really weighed heavy on our minds. It weighed heavy on our minds because we learned that Arkansas is the third deadliest state in America as far as a history of racial terror lynching. Arkansas has 492 documented lynchings. And when I say documented, what the Equal Justice Initiative does is they have a bunch of university students that are interns that do the research. And if they're able to find two articles in two separate newspapers that verify that a lynching occurred, that is what they consider documented. Now, we know that out of the 492 that they were able to document, there's probably another 492 that were never documented. So that this weighed heavy on me, it weighed heavy on my wife, it weighed heavy on our children. It weighed heavy on me because I was able to see John Carter's name on the memorial, and knowing how he is connected to my own family's history with racial terror lynching, it was hard. It's very somber. My wife, her family is from Phillips County. Her great-grandfather and grandfather were in Elaine, living in Elaine in 1919 when all hell broke loose there. And they ended up escaping and jumping on a train and going to Chicago. But they were able to witness what happened the first day. And they stayed in Chicago for a couple of decades before they decided to come back to Arkansas. And they came back to Arkansas because basically, you know, that's home, that's their roots. Me, myself, I've lived in several states throughout the United States. I've lived in a couple of countries. And I always want to come back home to Little Rock, Arkansas, because this is where I was born and raised. So I do understand why they came back, even after all of that violence. So what APJMM does is, our goal is to memorialize those 492 documented lynchings one by one. And we started last year, and I just happened to be on the board of trustees for the Arkansas Historical Association. So I'm tapped into all of the working historians, professional and non-professional, here in Arkansas. And in this picture here, you see my wife, that beautiful woman in the middle, flanked by Dr. Brian Mitchell from UALR History Department, and Federal Judge Brian Miller, who is also a descendant of some of the victims of the Elaine massacre. And this particular event is an event that we did a memorial at the National Cemetery in Little Rock for Frank Moore, who is one of the Elaine 12. The Elaine 12, for those of you who do not know, are the 12 men that were sentenced to death wrongfully the Elaine massacre. There were actually a total of, I think it was 120, 130 wrongful convictions that were given out over the span of a week after that incident. And 12 people were sentenced to death. And because of another relative of mine, Judge Scipio Africanus Jones, they were eventually freed, and their case actually went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. I said all that to say that if we don't acknowledge our history, we can't deal with what's going on today because we're in denial. My wife, she has a saying that I really like. She talks about our past is our present. And that's very true. And until we acknowledge our past, we will not be able to deal with our present. We will not be able to plan properly for our future. And one of the biggest problems that we have with our past is otherism. I use the word or otherism because racism is a charged word. And we get a lot of people. I don't like using words that turn off conversations. And racism turns off conversations with a lot of racists. It really does. A lot of people who are either overtly or covertly racist, they can't stand that word. And if you say it in their presence, they immediately shut down. So the word that I like to use is otherism, which basically is the exclusion of a person or a group based on their perceived diversion from an acceptable norm or status quo established by the perpetrators and quasi-perpetrators of structural and cultural violence. One reason why I put quasi-perpetrators, and this is a definition that I came up with myself, the reason I put quasi-perpetrators in there because you get a lot of people saying, I didn't do anything to your people. I didn't enslave anybody. I didn't lynch anybody. Well, a quasi-perpetrator is someone who is benefiting from that slavery and that lynching. So you're either a perpetrator or you're a quasi-perpetrator. And once you are comfortable with that designation, then you can move forward to what we're going to do about it. Back in 2000, after because it's about 1996 is when I learned about my great uncle Lonnie Dixon, because he was a family secret. And I learned about him basically, that was around the time where the Little Rock Central Library System was still, the headquarters was still located in that building on Main Street over, I think it's near Second Presbyterian or Second Methodist Church right behind there. But I was in there one weekend studying, I love to go to the library and just read. And I was in there studying this, and I said 96, it's 86 is when I first learned about them. So in 86, I'm a 10th grader at Little Rock Central High School, and I'm spending the weekend studying in the library, and I come across the story of my great uncle Lonnie Dixon, reading the old newspapers, Arkansas Gazette. I used to love putting those rolls on the machine and, looking at all the different, I'm a nerd, so. So when I learned about that incident, and I'm reading and I saw my great grandfather's name, Frank Dixon, and I saw his picture, and, I was really taken aback because I never knew that my grandmother had a brother. So I immediately left the library and got on the bus and rode the bus over to my grandmother's house. And I asked her, who is Lonnie Dixon? I said, hey, grandmother, hugged her and kissed her. Then I said, who is Lonnie Dixon? And now my grandmother is already very fair-skinned. She's fair-skinned enough to, she's able to pass for white, or she was when she was alive. And she passed for white from the standpoint where she was a pivotal person during the 1957 Central High crisis. She passed for white and was a member of the Women's Emergency Committee and also one of the best friends of Mrs. Fulbus. But my grandmother, as white as she was, when I asked her who was Lonnie Dixon, she turned whiter. And she sat down and just started crying. And that's when we had the conversation and she told me about what happened. And it stayed with me. I was never able to let go of what I learned. And back in the mid 90s, I recently come home from the United States Air Force Academy. I had a presidential nomination to the Air Force Academy, and I also had a congressional nomination to West Point. I chose to go to the Air Force Academy because I wanted to learn how to ski. But at the Air Force Academy, it was the first time that I ever experienced being called a nigger. And I was called a nigger basically every day. And at the Air Force Academy, I don't know how they do it now, but the cadets there were allowed to fly Confederate flags in the outside the windows of their dormitory. So it was interesting marching in formation where you're saluting the United States flag, and you look up, and just a couple of feet above it, you see a whole bunch of Confederate flags flying out of people's windows. So it was a very difficult and traumatic time for me as an 18, 19-year-old. And when the Persian Gulf War broke out, I was there. And since I'm a Muslim, for those of you that don't know by looking at my name, but I was immediately placed under house arrest and told that I was a threat to the United States. And I ended up having to resign and leave the Air Force Academy because I couldn't handle it. And I had to come home, and I had several years of mental therapy that I had to go through. And at one point, I was actually homeless for a couple of years because I just couldn't handle society. But when I got my stuff together and I came back, the first thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to provide a way for young people to talk. Just like I told you earlier about what me and my wife did with KWCP. Well, the first radio show that I started was Fat Lip Youth Talk Radio on KABF 88.3 FM back in 1994. I was a 7th grade social studies teacher at Henderson Junior High School. And at that time, the HBO special Bangin' in Little Rock came out. And so we had a lot of young people that were very disturbed by what they saw in that documentary. And I say documentary because a lot of the stuff was actually the children thought that they were acting, but yet it was portrayed as it was actually something that was really happening. So during that same time, that summer, there were about 4 or 5 young Black men that were killed by the Little Rock Police Department within the span of 5 weeks, 5-6 weeks. And at that time, a lot of the young people that I was working with were very dismayed and very disturbed. And we used our radio show, Fat Lip, to actually put out how they were feeling. And it actually was very therapeutic. But one thing is, a lot of young people would call in and they would ask us, well, what do I do if the police stop me? And, how do I conduct myself? And I'd never been one that dealt with that type of information because I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. My family is a part of the Black bourgeoisie here in Central Arkansas. So I never really thought about things like that. But, to see that happened. And then at the same time, this was around the same time that Rodney King incident happened in Los Angeles. So it started to change my frame of reference. And I spent 7 years going to the ULR library every single night for 2 or 3 hours and researching to answer the questions that these young people were asking when they called into the radio station. And the tables have turned. A Street Guide to Guerrilla Lawfare is the result of that 7 years of research, where I wrote this book to teach young people not only about how to deal with police-citizen interactions, but also how to understand what we're dealing with. And it blew my mind in the research. And I don't know, Sherry and I were talking on the phone yesterday, and she was telling me how her mind was blown just by reading the book. Yeah, and Sherry, imagine how you felt and me learning about this stuff back when I was 22, 23 years old. And I was really only able to put about a third of the stuff that I was able to learn in the book, because it took me another 4 years to write the book. And my father at the time, he said, you know how many books Stephen King has wrote since you've been researching this? Get your book out there. So I ended up going ahead and publishing it. But this book talks about structural violence and how the government uses violence to control and manipulate us and turn us against each other, and basically to generate revenue. Because as long as we're fighting each other, as long as we are held down with a knee on our neck, then they're able to do whatever they want to do without having to check in with us. Structural violence is the avoidable and often traumatizing use of force, regardless of the intent, and that is used to impair fundamental needs. Fundamental needs like food, clothing, shelter, love, peace, and happiness, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. There's 12 fundamental needs that all humans need. And structural violence is the avoidable. The word is very important. It's avoidable. You don't have to do it, but you do it for a particular reason. And it arises from human decisions made within state and corporate sponsored artificial systems. And that's juxtaposed on, all of you have read your insurance policies and they have a clause for acts of God. Basically, to give you an example, I grew up off of 12th Street in what's now called Midtown Little Rock, and I grew up about 3 blocks from not 3 blocks, 3 houses from Elizabeth Eckford. And I didn't even know who she was when I was growing up. She never told me who she was. My parents never told me who she was. But I would see her twice a week walking from her house, which is basically at 18th Street, and walking down to 12th Street to the grocery store at 12th and Lewis, and getting, bags of groceries. And at that time, we didn't have plastic bags. They were paper bags. And you'd see her walking back home carrying 3 and 4 bags of groceries from 12th Street all the way up to 18th Street. And she's still in her advanced age. But I remember when I think I was 10, 11 years old, and I just stopped her one day as she was passing my house. And I'm like, ma'am, is there any way that I can go to the grocery store from you from now on? Because I don't like seeing you walking up and down the street carrying these groceries. So from that day on until I graduated from high school and went to the Air Force Academy, twice a week, she would call me and give me her money, and I would walk to the grocery store for her and then walk back. And that grocery store was very, very, very important to the community up until 2013 when it finally closed in 2013. Right now it's 2020 and it has not been replaced yet. So for 7 years, that community has been without a grocery store. And the closest grocery store to that community is located over on Rodney Parham, the Kroger over on Rodney Parham. And so it's difficult for people to get access to fresh food. It's difficult for people to get cost effect, food stuffs that are nutritious and they are reasonably priced. So a lot of people in that community, they eat their food that they buy from gas stations. They eat their food that they buy from there's a Family Dollar there. But the thing is so that community is really ingesting a lot of foods that they should not be eating, no fresh foods. And so what we call that is food apartheid. Food apartheid is when you, we're regardless of the intent, it's when you remove the means for people to properly feed themselves. So I was telling you that because that's an example of structural violence. And the bishop, when he wrote his thing on why the Catholic Church, the Little Rock Catholic Diocese should support the Black Lives Matter movement, he was very poignant in stating that a lot of white people that live in West Little Rock and a lot of people that live in the Heights, they are just completely blind to how Black people are really living south of I-630. And I'm saying south of I-630 because I want to keep it local. I know there are other people that are from around the United States listening to this, but the importance is I want to be able to give you guys something that you can, some action steps that can be, that you can do here locally once we're done. Because if you're always talking about what happened in Chicago or what happened in Minneapolis, what happened in Los Angeles, what happened in DC, if you're constantly fixed on that, then you have a situation where you think it can't happen here. And it is happening here. So structural violence gets its fuel from cultural violence. And cultural violence is the avenue by which the church, political parties, and social groups legitimize structural violence by redefining the moral code in a way that allows society to blindly, silently, and unquestionably accept structural violence, as long as it is only knowingly perpetrated against the other. And thereby they establish the status quo. And I told you about what otherism is. And this otherism is dealing, you have your isms, racism, classism, sexism. That's otherism. So what the bishop was talking about is a lot of Catholic parishioners are blind to what's going on, and they're blind to what's going on because the church itself is participating, whether knowingly or not, in cultural violence. And one of the beautiful things that I like about my relationship with Sherry and George is, and Pax Christi, is that it gives me an opportunity to go to Catholic parishioners and say, hey, here's what we can do. Here's how we can move the ball where we're actually practicing the tenets of our faith, whatever that is. Symbolic violence. Symbolic violence is the manifestation of cultural violence exhibited through information and media arts in a way that develops both consciously and unconsciously oppressive relationships between victims of structural violence and its perpetrators and quasi-perpetrators. So, there's a lot of talk about the media. One thing that I wrote about in my book is the perp walk. There used to be back in, and this stopped. It's interestingly enough, it stopped shortly after I wrote about it. But there used to be a thing where on the nightly news, where you would actually see people in handcuffs with their heads down doing what's called the perp walk. And it was all, you never ever saw any white person doing a perp walk. It was always Black males doing perp walks. And that is symbolic violence because, me, myself, growing up, I always thought like, when is my perp walk is going to happen? And what is going to happen that's going to make me have to do that? And so I've spent a lot of time growing up as a Black male in America, figuring out what do I need to do to keep out of the back of a police car? What do I need to do to keep those, what we call bracelets, off of my wrists? What do I have to do to keep from being imprisoned? And that anxiety, that trauma of just having to think about that, and I've been thinking about it since I was in high school. That's a result of symbolic violence, and that's some of the things that in further discussions we need to talk about. Ouachita Foothills Youth Media Arts and Literacy Collective, one of our goals, one of our mandates is destroying this symbolic violence and putting an alternative narrative out there so that people can start asking questions about what is happening and what needs to happen. This Black Lives Matter has really gotten a lot of traction since George Floyd was murdered. And since George Floyd was murdered, I've been in communion, I guess that's a good word to say, with about 40 other young Black leaders throughout the state of Arkansas. And we've been organizing protests. We've been organizing letter writing campaigns, email campaigns. And one of the things that I've been doing is I've been doing a lot of posting. My Facebook page, it actually turned into like an Information Central type Facebook page where it's geared specifically towards putting out the narrative that needs to be put out as far as Black Lives Matter is concerned. I was inboxed back, that's June 22nd, I was inboxed a couple of weeks ago, and someone inboxed me, and it's interesting that I get a lot of people that feel the need to inbox me or put comments on my page. And they say a lot of foul things, a lot of, like, are you sure you're a Christian? Because, I got my mouth washed out with soap when I was growing up and I said stuff like that. But I had someone that inboxed me and told me how Black Lives Matter was anti-Christ language and that it went against biblical scripture. And they were talking about how all lives matter is what Jesus preached. And they didn't know that when I was a teenager at Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, that Reverend G. Roy Osborne actually took me to the side and started preparing me to be a minister. So I had a lot of ministerial training in my teenage years. So they didn't know that I was able to crack open a Bible and like, okay, well, let me give him the lesson that he needs. So I opened the Gospel of Luke to actually show this gentleman where in the Bible there's a mandate from Jesus himself that talks about the importance of his followers spending time and energy working for the causes that relate to the poor, to the brokenhearted, to the captives meaning prisoners, to the blind, to the afflicted, and seeking, helping them to find forgiveness for their acts. And it's very important that talks about forgiveness. When we talk about forgiveness, that means everybody is redeemable. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, there is redemption. And a lot of times in our society, a lot of times in the world that I live in, there is no redemption that is afforded to Black people from white people. We don't receive that same redemption that is in your scriptures, that you pray about and that you talk about when you go to church on Sundays. And so it was very important for me to show this gentleman that wrote to me and told me that, no, Black Lives Matter is going against the teachings of Jesus. And I think it was shortly after I made this post that Sherry and I began talking about what's going on here tonight. Pax Christi is important to me because I first became familiar with the organization actually not here in Little Rock, but in Memphis. Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement, our sister organization in Memphis, is called the Memphis Lynching Project. I believe that's the correct name. But when Clarice and I were trying to figure out how to do what we do as far as APJMM is concerned, the closest organization that we were able to connect with was in Memphis. So we drove and spent the weekend in Memphis with the people there with the Memphis Lynching Project. And one of the things that they said was very important to them is their relationship with the Memphis chapter of Pax Christi, and how they would not be as successful as they were if it were not for Pax Christi. So definitely when we came back home, that's when we originally reached out to Pax Christi here. And Sherry, if you remember, that's when I started coming to the meetings that you guys had at the diocese. And those are some really good meetings. I can't wait till all of this COVID stuff is over so we can continue that. So the United States Conference on Catholic Bishops, they have put out statements that are very important and very vital to what I'm talking about right now. If we go back to this scripture right here, that was in the Gospel of Luke, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops have put out a similar statement talking about the importance of that scripture. And I actually started doing some research on the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and I came across this 1958 statement that was issued by the Catholic bishops. And I want to read, I got to move all of these people's picture out of my way. Okay, there we go. Number 2, the providence of God. There, in the providence of God, There are among us millions of fellow citizens of the Negro race. We owe to these fellow citizens who have contributed so largely to the development of our country and for whose welfare history imposes on us a special obligation of justice. That's a very important clause right there. Whose welfare history imposes on us, meaning Catholics, a special obligation of justice, to see that they have, in fact, the rights which are given them in our Constitution. This means not only political equality, but also fair economic and educational opportunities, a just share of public welfare projects, good housing without exploitation, and a full chance for the social advancement of their race. Ladies and gentlemen, this was written in 1958, and it's extremely relevant here today. And one thing that I would charge you guys to do is take that and run with it. That's your mandate right there. Your mandate is not only do you need to seek justice for all, but there's a special obligation because of the history that this country and this world has dealing with racial injustices. There's a special obligation for you to reach out to those Black lives that we were talking about. And here's the article that was in the most recent newsletter where Bishop Anthony Taylor talks about what I just said, that was written in 1957, and talks about the blindness of the white parishioners to the importance of the plight and the circumstances of Black people in America, and why it is important for us all to not only say Black Lives Matter, but let's start talking not only with our mouths, but let's talk with our feet, let's talk with our knees, let's talk with our pencils, and well, it's an electronic world now, so you know, our emails, let's talk with our votes, let's talk with our pocketbooks, and let's all say that Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, a lot of people don't know that it's an organization that is not even an organization. It's actually a social media movement that began after the incident in 2014 with that happened in Ferguson, Missouri. And after that horrendous killing of Michael Brown, where his body was left in the street for hours for the community to watch. You know, you remember that symbolic violence I was talking about? That was symbolic violence. There was a couple of young ladies, and it's interesting that the Black Lives Matter movement was actually a movement that was created by the Black LGBTQ plus community. They're the ones that actually started this Black Lives Matter movement. And in every city you go to, including here in Central Arkansas, some of the main organizers for Black Lives Matter are members of the LGBTQ plus community. But they created the impetus for us to be where we are today. And back about 3 years ago, in 2017, 2018, there was about 50 organizations that got together and about 50 Black organizations from throughout the United States got together, and they created a memorandum of understanding, which is now known as the Movement for Black Lives. So a lot of people are talking about Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. It's an anarchist organization. Black Lives Matter is not an organization at all. It's a social media movement. The name of the organization is the Movement for Black Lives. And the Movement for Black Lives, this is the one of the first pages of a 320-page policy book that they put together after meeting for several years. And they came up with everything that needs to be corrected in order for Black people to live an equitable life alongside with white people. And this book, if you go to their website, the Movement for Black Lives, you can get this information. But basically, what we want to do is we just want to end the war on Black people. There's been a war on Black people. There's been a war on Black communities. There's been a war on Black men, Black women, Black children. As long as I've been alive, I'll be 50 years old in November, and I'm very well aware of that war. And it's sad that my mother and father, when they were married, and I was in the 5th grade, and they sat me and my older and younger brother down and had the talk with us. You don't know what the talk is. The talk is when a Black parent sits their Black child down and teaches them how not to go out and get killed by the police. Keep your hands up at all times where they could be seen. Say yes, sir, and no, sir. You know, things like that. So I had my first talk when I was in the 5th grade. And I have a son, a 4-year-old son, and I'm really dreading having the talk with him. But I know that I'm going to have the talk with him. And I've already started at 4 years old preparing him for that talk. I'm showing this document right here. This is page 19 of the City of Little Rock's 2020 budget. And if you look at this organizational chart, who's at the top of the organizational chart? It's the citizens. Who's down at the bottom? The police. So the citizens are up here, even above the mayor, and the police is down there. But when you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, and you talk about the desire to reallocate resources from the police department into other departments, the response is that first and foremost, you have no right to be having this conversation. Second of all, the police are always put on a pedestal where they're where the citizens are located. And so one of the mandates of the Black Lives Matter movement is the reallocation of the budgets of the police department. Here in Little Rock, the Little Rock Police Department gets $82 million a year. $82 million a year. Now, look at these organizations here. You see fire, you see housing and neighborhood, community programs, parks and recreation, planning and development, public works. You put all of these other entities together, and their combined budget is $30 million. So when we talk about reallocating resources, and we're here in Arkansas, because we know the type of political climate we live in, we're only asking for 10% of that $80 million. Just give us $8 million so that we can put it into community programs, so that we could put it into housing in neighborhoods, so that we could put it into parks and recreation. Because these entities are having to close down their programs and their projects because they don't have the money, because all of the money is going to the police department. So when you hear defund the police, you have to divorce yourself from that jerk instinct that, oh, they're trying to get rid of the police department. What are we going to do? It's going to be total anarchy. No, that's not what's happening. What's happening is we want $8 million of that $82 million that you're spending on the police. And what are you spending that money on? I've sent in a Freedom of Information Act request to find out what that money is actually being spent on. And City Attorney Tom Carpenter has not taken down the barriers for me to get that information so that I can properly articulate it. But we can look at the results of that budget. The Little Rock Police Department right now has a force where I think 60% of the force lives outside of the city of Little Rock. 60% of the force lives in Benton, Bryant, Cabot, Hot Springs. So we have 60% of the force living outside of Little Rock. Not only are they being paid money that's not being reinvested here in our communities, but they all have their own police cars that they get to drive back and forth to and from the cities that they live in. So they don't have to pay for any maintenance on the cars. They don't have to pay for any fuel. They don't have to pay for any insurance. So defunding the police is, hey, if you're going to live in Bryant, we personally believe that policing should be done by citizens of Little Rock, people that live in Little Rock, people who know the citizens of the city of Little Rock. And I'll talk about that later, what we're trying to do towards that. But one way we can defund the police is we could take these police cars away from these people. If you're going to live in Bryant, drive your own car. If you're going to live in Hot Springs, if you're going to live in Cabot, drive your own car. We don't need to pay for you to come from outside of our communities into our communities and abuse us. That's that structural violence that I'm talking about. A lot of times, a lot of people don't understand that the Black Lives Matter movement is nothing but a continuation of the civil rights movement. If you look at the difference, the main difference is that the Black Lives Matter movement is actually a worldwide movement. It's a movement where to date, there's been a demonstration, a protest in every single capital on the planet. There's been a demonstration, there's been a protest in every single state in the United States, in most of the major cities. I think last I heard that there were over 200 cities in the United States where demonstrations are continuing to go on. We're not seeing the protests here in Little Rock. And that's a whole nother story. I can explain to you why they stopped here. It's a little bit of trickery on the part of our elected officials. But just because you're not seeing the protests on the news, it doesn't mean they're still going on. There was a protest just yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, the day before yesterday, there was a major protest in Kentucky. If you guys don't know what's going on in Kentucky, there's a young lady by the name of Breonna Taylor who was literally assassinated in her bed. And I have a special love for her memory because not only was she worked in emergency medical services, but that's been my career for the last decade, I work in emergency medical services as an advanced EMT. So that really hit me hard to see that, because us EMTs, us paramedics, we have a really, really, really good relationship with the police and with fire. And to see the police come and do that to her made it even more unable for me to digest. But a couple of days ago, and it's very interesting, I tried to put the video in this PowerPoint, but this is the first PowerPoint that I've ever made, so I'm still trying to figure out how they work. I think I'm doing good thus far. What do you guys think? But a couple of days ago, there were 87 people who went to the Kentucky Attorney General's house, and they did a sit-in on his front lawn. 87 people. And out of those 87 people, half of them were white. And those 87 people were all arrested by the Kentucky State Police, and they were all put in jail, and they were charged with felony intimidation. Felony intimidation of a member of a judicial process. And the same day that happened, there was a group of about 15 white supremacists that went to the home of the Kentucky governor. And they hung an effigy, they lynched an effigy on the tree in his front yard. None of them were arrested. None of them were charged. That's the difference in what we're talking about here, is when you're on the side of right, when you're trying to fight for the downtrodden, the poor, the blind, the afflicted, that goes against the perpetrators of structural violence, and they sometimes turn the apparatus of that structural violence onto you. And that's one thing that I hear from a lot of white people who are really afraid to get out and support Black Lives Matter movement, because they are afraid of being arrested. They're afraid of losing their friends and arguing with their family members. Really, they're afraid of giving up their white privilege. And this picture right here, these are two pictures right beside each other. It gives me a visual opportunity to explain to you what white privilege is, what structural violence is, what equality and equity is. Because in the 1960s, they were fighting for equality. We're not fighting for equality today. We're fighting for equity. We want equitable treatment. But if you look at these people in the stands watching this baseball game, those are the people who have white privilege. They're comfortable, they're sitting in their seats, enjoying the game. The fence that you see there, that gray fence, that fence is structural violence. Structural violence is something that is put up to impede someone from enjoying a right or a privilege. So when you put up this fence, then there's some people that aren't going to be able to participate. Baseball being the great American pastime, so that's a symbol of American life. So when structural violence prevents some people from being able to participate in this thing that we call American life. And back in the 60s, during the civil rights movement, when they were fighting for equality, you see what happened there. Some people were able to endure the structural violence because they were big enough. They had the college education. They had a little bit of wealth. There are some Black people that are in the upper echelons as far as socioeconomic concerns are. Then you have the boy in the red shirt. I call that that's emblematic of the middle class. The middle class is just barely able to participate in American life. But you look at those lower classes. Look at the poor people in the purple shirt. Structural violence totally impairs their ability to participate in American life. So if that's why we're not fighting for equality here. We're beginning our fight with Black Lives Matter movement, fighting initially for equity. And that's the initial fight, because our goal is to first put it where everyone will be able to participate in the American dream. And in order to do that, you have to reach people where they are at. You have to reach people where they're at so that everyone can participate. And what that means is you can't treat people the same way. You have to treat them where they are at. There are people who are let's say, for instance, the homeless people. And I say homeless in quotations because I don't like that word. You can't define someone based on whether or not they have access to a roof over their head. But someone who is called quote unquote homeless, or who is living in a state of quote unquote homelessness, they have to be treated with a little bit more support, a little bit more justice than myself, me sitting here in my home office in my home in Sherwood. So we have to recognize that different people need different things in order for us all to enjoy the same thing. But like I said, the fight for equity is the beginning fight. The goal is to knock that fence down. Once we can knock that fence down and dismantle structural violence, then that's when we all are able to really enjoy the American dream. And as these people on the outside of the fence are fighting just to be able to see what's going on and not really experience it, we have people in the stands that have no clue of what's going on out here at the fence. And that's what the bishop was talking about in his letter. Justice. What is justice? I love the etymology of words. And whenever I want to look up a word and find the true meaning of a word, I look up the etymology of that word. And the etymology of justice deals with equity. It deals with righteousness. It deals with vindication. One of the things that happened in the 14th century, if you look down here, in the 14th century, the word justice took on the meaning that it has now. The word criminal justice is an oxymoron. You can't have the word criminal and justice together. But in the world that we live in now, justice means the infliction of punishment. It means legal vengeance. And that's not what the word means. If you read the teachings of Jesus are more in line with the true meaning of justice. Justice dealing with equity, justice dealing with righteousness, justice dealing with fairness and moral soundness, conformity to truth. That's what we're looking for when we ask for, when you hear no justice, no peace. What we're basically saying is We will be in your face until you recognize our humanity and you give us justice. You give us the ability to participate in the American dream. Okay, my computer. Okay, here we go. That's not 16, that's 18. There are 18 levels of justice that, and this is a list that I came up with personally, and this is the list that I have put forth for the Arkansas Black Lives Matter organizers as we put together our own documents for policy changes that we want here in the state of Arkansas. The first justice that we demand is transitional justice. Transitional justice is when you first admit that there is a problem and that there has been a problem and you want to change things. There is a problem in this country. There has been a problem in this country for centuries. And until we admit that, and until we repent and find redemption, not only for others, but for ourselves, we're not going to be able to enter into this transitional justice. Historical justice is being able, that's what we do with APJMM. The historical justice that we do is we take those 492 people who were victims of racial terror lynching, and we memorialize them. And that is what historical justice is about admitting what has happened and how it has happened. We have historical injustice right now with the Confederate monuments. The Confederate monuments were not put up for the purposes that we're told today that they were put up for. They're actually symbolic violence. A Confederate monument is an example of symbolic violence. Food justice. I talked about the food apartheid that's going on south of I-630. Economic justice, healthcare justice, housing justice, labor justice, environmental justice, education justice. You look at the Little Rock School District right now and the condition that it's in. Even though the Catholic diocese has its own school system, which one of my goals is to work with the Catholic school system here in Arkansas to work with the students in that school system, just as I've been working with the students in the public school systems in Pulaski County. But just because you have your own school systems, that does not mean that you can have a blind eye to what's going on in the Little Rock School District. What would Jesus do? Jesus would not take a blind eye to what's going on, and neither should you. Spiritual justice, procedural justice. Procedural justice is basically when you're first of all, you shouldn't be pulled over by the police just because you're Black. Driving while Black, walking while Black, working while Black. All of these things while Black is going on. I've been a victim of most of those throughout my adult life. Procedural justice lets us know that there are certain rules of conduct that we must all follow. And if those rules are only being enforced on one segment of society, then there is no that's procedural injustice. Restorative justice, it deals with whenever one citizen violates another citizen. instead of throwing the book at them and locking them up for 25 years to life. Let's restore them, and let's let them admit they're wrong, and let's let them as a community find a process where they can be brought back into the community. Right now, we have a penal system that thrives on people being locked up, and it's an economic thing. Our penal system, the reason we have the largest number of incarcerated citizens in this country is because people are making money off of it. And so we need to get away from this penal system, and let's come up with a system of restorative justice. Political justice deals with the fact that, and I'm going to talk about this in a couple of minutes, but the fact that white people make up the vast majority of the population, not only here in Little Rock, but in the state of Arkansas and in the country. And you have to stop voting based on somebody's skin color. And let's start voting on what is right, what is just, who is going to be put in the office that's going to push forward the equity and the righteousness and the truth that we all as a society deserve. And so one thing that we're doing with Black Lives Matter movement here in Arkansas is we're putting together a slate of candidates, and I'm going to introduce you to two of those candidates, and that we're going to ask all Catholic parishioners to help us get those candidates on the Little Rock City Council. Electoral justice is the ability to have our voice in who gets put into office. Right now in this COVID-19 era, we're getting a lot of pushback all around the country from a mail-in ballots, and the mail-in ballot is something that, if there really is a pandemic, and if it's really not safe to go outside with a mask on, and if it's not safe for people who have compromised immune systems and people who are elderly and people who already have existing health conditions, and those existing health conditions go back to the food justice and to the food apartheid, then why are we not creating situations where people can vote without having to further subject themselves to this pandemic that's going on? Communal and spatial justice. Communal and spatial justice is allowing Black people to basically, create their own communities and have their own spaces where it's not required to have a white person there. And I say that because every Black person knows that when we are amongst ourselves, we're a lot at ease, and we're able to communicate and talk amongst ourselves. But in any situation, when there is a white person around, because of the trauma that we're dealing with because of structural violence, we're not able to be ourselves. So what we say is we should have some spaces where we can be ourselves. Technological justice is justice that deals with, especially in this COVID-19 era, we have a problem with people going back to school, and there's going to be a lot of young Black children that's going to have to go back to school because they don't have access to the internet at home. So making internet accessible to everyone information and media justice. We talked about that earlier. And finally, trauma justice. The beautiful thing about this list of demands that we have here is that when the Black Lives Matter movement wins, everyone wins. This is not a situation where we're taking something from white people, or we're going to create a situation where white people are now the victims of structural violence. And that sounds totally absurd, but there's actually people. But when we win, everyone wins. Healthcare justice is something that everyone should have, no matter what their skin color, no matter what their socioeconomic background is. So in closing, I want to give you guys a list of things to do. The first thing I want to do is give you a list of books that everyone on this call needs to not only acquire and read, but discuss with their families, discuss with their friends, and also share. The first book on that list, I'm pretty prejudiced here. The first book on the list is my own book, The Tables Have Turned, A Street Guide to Guerrilla Lawfare. It's a self-help manual on what to do and what not to do during a police-citizen confrontation. Since it was written in the 90s, it was written for the quote-unquote hip-hop generation and Generation X. But it's still relevant here 20 years later. And I'm right now in the process of writing the 25th anniversary edition. And I am in the process of writing additional chapters that are relevant to today and the Black Lives Matter movement, and also looking for some publisher that will be able to pick the book up so that it can have mass appeal. This book I wrote and I self-published it back in the year 2000. And when I self-published it, I purchased 10,000 copies of it. And those 10,000 copies I sold out in about 8 months of those 10,000 copies. And basically what I would do is I would go to hip hop concerts and have them in my trunk and sell them in the parking lot at hip hop concerts. So that's how the word got out. And now, since this book is currently out of print because I'm a member of the poor, and that's a good thing. I'm poor because I have a family now, a wife and children that I'm taking care of, and all of my money goes to making sure that they are happy. So I don't have additional money to publish a book right now. That's why I need a publisher. But this book right now is available for free because of what's happening in our world. It's available for free, and Sherry has the link that I think she's already shared with you guys on how to access the book.
Kwami,
Yes.
Kwami, just a minute. I also put that link into chat. So if anyone doesn't have the link, I didn't put any words, I just stuck the link.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to copy that link, they can do so if they didn't get it earlier.
Indeed. Thank you. All right, the next book that I want you guys to read is America's Unholy Ghost, The Racist Roots of Our Faith and Politics. The author of that book was in Little Rock last year, speaking at the Social Justice Institutes at Philander Smith College. They had a presentation that they brought him into town. Very good book, very informative book, and you guys definitely should check it out. The next book that I want you guys to get is The Color of Compromise, The Truth About America's Church The American Church Complicity in Racism by Jamar Tesby. And he's actually a Arkansas native. He lives in Phillips County. And he worked with Second Baptist Church in downtown to do a series based on this book for the members of that church that I was able to attend, which was a very good series. The next book is Racial Justice in the Catholic Church. Racial Justice in the Catholic Church is a book that was written by Brian N. Massengale. Brian N. Massengale. If you guys don't know who he is, it would be really good for you to learn who he is. He's a really good brother who's a Catholic academic. The next book and the last book is the Little Book of Biblical Justice. And this Little Book of Biblical Justice is part of a series of books that are put out by an organization called Coming to the Table. Coming to the Table is an organization that was founded on, it was founded by the descendants, Black and white descendants of President Thomas Jefferson. Excuse me. And they wanted to create a situation where Black and white people can come together in the same room and sit at the same table and look at each other and be honest and talk to each other. And APJMM is actually the Arkansas chapter of Coming to the Table. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to, okay, there we go. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to go to the Coming to the Table website and become a member. Right now, in the last 2 months, we've gotten 47 people that have joined. I think Sherry joined a couple of days ago. I saw her name on the list. So come to the table so that we can have some conversations and we can talk about what we need to do to take our country, take our country and our city and our state and our county to the next level where we are all living in an equitable and just world. And we have to do it together. The two candidates that we want you to guys to consider voting for and supporting for at-large position number 9 and at-large position number 10, LaRon McAdoo and Sheridan Richards. Those are the candidates that the Black Lives Matter movement is supporting for the Little Rock City Director at-large positions. These at-large positions are extremely important because they're the most powerful positions on city council. And those positions have, since they were created, have been exclusively held by old white people. And those positions have traditionally voted against policies that look to instill equity and look to instill justice for the communities that live south of I-630. So we want to put people in those positions that believe what we believe. The next thing I want you to do is in October 22nd, will be the 25th National Day of Protest to stop police brutality, repression, and the criminalization of a generation. And we're planning on having a really big rally, and we would like all of the Catholic parishioners to be out there with us. One thing that is very important that's happening around the country that's not happening here is we're not seeing religious leaders out in the protests and out in the streets with their religious uniforms on, with their religious clothing on, and that speaks volumes. It spoke volumes in the 60s, and it's speaking volumes in other cities, but we need to have that here in Central Arkansas. Here's a list of the 39 people who have been killed here in Arkansas by law enforcement in the last 5 years. When you have 39 people, 39 unarmed Arkansans that have been killed by law enforcement in 5 years, that's roughly one killing every 48 days for the last 5 years. And yes, we know about George Floyd, we know about Breonna Taylor, but we need to know about the people on this list as well, and we need to speak their names and we need to say their names. One thing that we're doing here in Arkansas is the Black Lives Matter movement here in Arkansas, the organizers, we've come together to create a nonprofit that we call Investing in Black Futures. And that nonprofit, our goal is to deal with in reinvesting and redeveloping the land mass that is south of I-630 and east of 430, are actually really east of John Barrow Road, because that's where the food desert is. And if you notice, and you look at the that should be 2010 census. I put 2020 census. But if you look at the 2010 census, look at all that blue area where all the white people live in Little Rock. Everybody lives north of I-630 and west of 430. The majority of white people in Little Rock, that's where they live. Look at where Black people live. It's the reverse. The majority of Black people in Little Rock live south of I-630 and east of 430. So investing in Black futures, we want to create a Black community redevelopment and reinvestment fund where we will initially deal with the land mass that I just described, that's south of I-630 and east of John Barrow Road. And also we want to include the Pankey addition. The Pankey addition out at Highway 10. So what our goal is to collect funds to redevelop and reinvest in these communities and to eliminate the structural violence known as food apartheid in that area. I talked about the grocery store that's been gone for the last 7 years. We want to create a system of community-owned grocery cooperatives that's run and owned by the residents, with the first one being at 12th and Lewis Streets, and we want to even name that store the Elizabeth Eckford grocery store. This fund, we want to be able to provide microloans and college scholarships to the area residents there. We want to purchase all of the abandoned and dilapidated properties within that area so that we can rebuild and refurbish them and then provide those properties at a 10-year, $60,000 mortgage with 2% interest. And you see the list of the people in order of importance. First, it would go to the current residents, then any Black residents in Pulaski County that want to relocate there. And thirdly, any fire, police, or EMS that want to live in that area, because it's very important that you live in the area that you work in if you're fire, police, and EMS. Graduates of historically Black colleges and universities, graduates of other colleges, 2- and 4-year colleges in Pulaski County, people who work at UAMS, St. Vincent's, and Baptist Health. And then after that, anybody, if there's any of those properties left over, anybody else who's interested in going into this area. What we want to do in order to create this fund, we want to petition the city of Little Rock to institute a 25-year 3/4 tax on all goods and services purchased within the city limits. We want to do that also with Pulaski County. We want to do that with the state of Arkansas. We also want to petition churches to within the city of Little Rock to have a 5% tithe of all congregation members to go towards this fund. And we also want to petition retail outlets within the city of Little Rock to institute a voluntary, round up to the nearest dollar campaign. And we're in the process of applying for grants with the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and a couple of other foundations so that we can start generating funds for this, money for this fund. And that's pretty much it. If you want to help out, because actually right now I'm actually late for work. And so as soon as I get off here, I'm going to be headed to work because I like to eat, my children like to eat, and my wife likes to eat. And we like living comfortably in this house that we live in. But our nonprofit is, we don't receive any type of outside funding except for what comes out of my own pocket. So if you want to donate to what we're doing with Ouachita Foothills Youth Media Arts and Literacy Collective, please go to the website, click on the donate button, and that money goes directly into the Ouachita Foothills bank account over at US Bank. And that will help us fund the work that we do. A lot of the work that we're doing right now is internet-based because of COVID-19. Also, if you want to support Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement, which I think now you know that it's your mandate as a good Catholic to do that, you go to our website, click on the Get Involved button, and then when you click on that, there will be a menu that falls down, and then there's a donate button, and you donate there, and that money goes to APJMM to help us do what we're doing. So right now, this is a monument that was actually destroyed with red paint just yesterday. I don't know what city this is in, but it's very symbolic. And I use this as my last picture in this presentation to say that white privilege is like having blood on your hands. And it's time for us to start cleaning our hands and washing our hands, just like we do with COVID-19. We have to wash our hands of structural violence. Thank you.
Kwami, incredible information. I just want to take 2 minutes. I know everybody's muted, but if anyone has a question for Kwami, do you have a minute, Kwami? I know you're late for work.
Oh, yeah. Well, I told him I was going to be an hour late anyway, so I'm glad I did.
Does anybody have a quick question? We won't keep you much longer, but that was such excellent information. So we'll see if anyone has a question for you.
Ashley held up her hand.
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you so much for your time, by the way, and that was really awesome. I really appreciate, too, you steering us towards candidates that we should be looking at, because that's something I'm trying really hard to consider, especially this year. And I was just wondering, if you know of a place or have more advice on just how I should approach these issues, like when I'm voting, if that makes any sense.
Well, one thing that we're doing is we're in the process of actually creating a legislation on the municipal, county, and state level that we're going to be pushing forward come January. We're in the process of writing ordinances. We're in the process of writing policies. We're in the process of writing bills that we're going to be putting forward. So in that respect, in addition to voting for the candidates that we ask you to vote for, when we go in front of the Arkansas legislature in those committee rooms with these bills that we're trying to put forth, like one bill to end qualified immunity. We need you guys there with us because the legislature, last session, we were trying to get a bill passed to create the Arkansas Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And because it was just a handful of Black people that were interested in doing it, they pretty much laughed at us and sent us on our way. But if we go in there and we have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of white people there with us, and they're all speaking about the importance of this legislation, then we have a better chance of getting things done here as far as the justice that we were talking about.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Anybody else? Father Harvey, can you unmute?
Oh, Father Harvey, hey, man. I didn't know you were on the call. I would have actually practiced for this because this was off the cuff.
No, you did. You did great, buddy. Thank you so much. I have a question. Bishop Taylor, of course, he's my bishop, and he said when the George Floyd incident happened, what can we do? What do we do? And I says, well, right now in the midst of this COVID-19, protesting is dangerous.
Yes.
For a lot of people, but after much prayer and thought and dialogue with some of the Black Catholics around the city and state, we decided to do a series of sessions, a series of listening sessions. We've had one already with our seminarians who are future priests for Arkansas. And we plan another one on August 20th with Pax Christi members, but a series of listening sessions whereby we allow the people, leadership in the white Catholic churches and the Pax Christi leadership to listen to a lot of solutions, because nobody wants to hear the pain. And I think it's important that we have to express our pain and what we've been going through over the time. So we're doing this, but I also at the same time want to begin to not just have listening sessions, but at the same time be it's like a wave of an ocean. The wave has this top portion, but underneath there's something else moving. So I like what you have to say, that we can begin to have something underneath moving towards a lot of the things you talked about, positive, in a positive direction to resolving some of these otherisms. So I like that. What do you think about what we're doing as far as listening sessions?
Oh, I think that's an excellent idea, and APJMM would love to work with you on getting that done. One of the things that we also believe is really important is that the Little Rock Diocese really gets behind you, Father, and support what you're doing. I had an opportunity about 2 years ago. I was a guest curator at the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, where I spent a year traveling around the state of Arkansas, interviewing the alumni of Negro schools. And I got a chance to interview a lot of the alumni of the Black Catholic schools here in Arkansas. And everyone thinks that you're a hero. So, so I'm glad to meet you. I think we talked on the phone once, or we were
we
doing
sure did.
phone tag.
we had a good conversation on the phone during that interview session.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much. Secondly, Sherry, you can hear me, I hope.
Yes.
Dr. Simon, normally we would take up an offering from our meeting to support the work, or at least I think in Kwami's case, the poor guy is struggling to make ends meet.
Yes.
Would it be possible to take up a contribution just for his own family needs?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think if whoever would like to donate to this can absolutely mail it to Pax Christi. And I can, you know what, Mary, can you put that up on the chat? Put Pax Christi and our address, which is 415 North McKinley Street, Little Rock, 72205. So if you'd like to donate tonight, either for this cause, for some of Kwami's work that he does, or to Kwami personally, please send us a check. We would, I'm sure that would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you. And thank you again, Kwami.
You're welcome.
And I look forward to being in touch with you.
Dixon hold her hand up.
Hey, Kwami. Okay,
Hey.
I'm on Facebook friends with you, and I
Yes,
just sent you
you
my
are.
phone. I just sent you my phone number because I need to have a serious talk with you about some things.
Okay.
So, give me a call at your convenience. I'm home most of the day working on my campaign, so
Okay.
I would love to talk to you.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay.
I'll be able to call you next week because of my
Actually,
schedule.
I could, if you send me if some way we can Zoom, I would
Okay.
like to do a face-to-face Zoom with you.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, thanks.
Kwami, I just got a text from someone who wants to donate $250 to you. So it's beginning. I want to just throw that out to all of you as a challenge. That'd be wonderful.
Thank you.
Can I say something? When you make the donation, you need to specify what it is for when you mail it in.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yes, put Kwami in the.
I see. Is that Father John?
Yes, I've got a question. I really liked how you gave us a bunch of all these definitions, give us something solid to sink our teeth into and kind of work from.
Mm-hmm.
And I also really appreciated that you used the word otherism, because I do agree that racism is a non-start conversation
Yes.
word.
Yes.
My experience has been in preaching and just kind of talking with family and friends that I end up using a lot of words that are kind of conversation non-starters. And I wonder what the best strategy is to have an open dialogue to kind of invite people to seeing the seriousness of the structural injustices in this nation without just immediately shutting them off from the beginning.
Well, that's a hard thing that day by day we're figuring that out, because I know, especially like on social media, you get a lot of people that they get really bold when they get in front of their computer and start typing. Basically my goal is to defuse the situation. So if I say something that offends you and you immediately let me know that I offend you, I'm immediately going to back down and I'm going to ask you, okay, what did I say? What's wrong? Let me rephrase that in a way that you understand it. So that's one thing that I've really been working on over the last, since January, and all of this stuff has been going on, because like defund the police. Defund the police is a non-starter. It's a non-starter, and it's not only as a non-starter, it's easily hijacked by people that are the perpetuators of structural violence. So I said, instead of us saying defund the police, let's say civilize the police, let's say humanize the police. And so yes, that's a trial and error type thing that we can all work on together. And at coming to the tables, that's one thing that we're going to be working on, is finding a language that is not charged in a way where it shuts people down and shuts people off. And you're welcome to join us in that conversation.
I'm so glad you
Appreciate
said that. I'm so glad you said that, because
Yeah.
that is the biggest thing I get, is like, be fun. I did a campaign. I've been working on campaign, learning how to campaign and stuff like, and messaging. And I just, when I heard that messaging, I just went, oh, that's not going to help us. So that's a really, we just, and so often it's the message and not what's behind the message.
Yes.
But it's the wording, and it's like, oh no, let's not say that. Anyway,
Yes.
I'm glad you said that.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have a question for Kwami before we wrap up? I know we've kept you a long time, but we needed it there's a lot of information and we need more conversations.
Yes.
More conversations. I think that will happen.
Hello, Kwami. Hey, this
Yes.
is Father Tony. I'm the pastor of St. Joseph in Conway, and Father Warren Harvey's home parish. And
Man,
anyway,
homeboy.
yeah, it's nice to meet you. And I had to join late, and I was just wondering, is there a way to make this presentation available? I'd love to get this information out on our Facebook page if that's possible. And
yes,
certainly
it's recorded, so
We'll put it on Pax Christi's Facebook page.
there you go.
Okay.
And we'll
And
then you can share it, and Father Tony too. Yeah.
And I also want you to invite you and Father Harvey and everyone to come to St. Joseph and help get this message out to the people there in Conway.
Yes.
So I just would love for you all to come out.
Great.
Yes, we just had an incident in Conway this past weekend with 2 unlawful arrests. So
Yeah. There's a lot of hurt and a lot of need to address some pain here in town. Yeah.
And actually, if you look at those pictures that I had in the background on my definitions, those were all pictures from the Conway protests.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Wow. Okay.
Anybody else?
Okay.
Okay. Father Harvey, I'm going to put you on, you're used to this by now. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you could close us with a prayer tonight.
Sure, of course.
Thank you.
Let us pray. Once again, thank you, Kwami, for being present to us and helping us to grow in wisdom and grow in grace. Let us pray. The God of our creation, you who rule and super rule our universe, you are the creator and maintainer and all that you have created. We thank you for this powerful gathering this evening through the technological means of our at our disposal. We thank you for the gift of Kwami and for the jewel that he is in our community. Lord, we just ask you to help us to open our hearts, open our minds to better understand the meaning of the love that you promote in all peoples, and that we begin to more and more listen to each other and then to work diligently to create this type of world and environment by which we live out what our Constitution says, that all people are created equal. And that we listen to the words of Dr. King, that we are all tied into this one garment of humanity, and what affects one directly affects all indirectly. So Lord, help us, loving God, help us to savor this moment and to take advantage of what we have going in our country and in our world. Bless those who are suffering from the COVID-19, those who have lost loved ones, and bless all those first responders physicians, technicians, nurses, paramedics, police officers, and firefighters and military who are helping to care for those who are in need. God, we thank you this night for all that you do with us, for us, and through us. And we say, amen.
Amen. Kwami, thank you so much. You're the best.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation. I want to do it again. So
I'm going to call you like tomorrow and
okay.
we'll talk. Okay.
Sounds like winter. All right. I'm out to work. I'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow.